Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Laura was annoyed. It was almost the time to pass exams, and she had a lot of assignments to do. She was broke, and now there were these funeral expenses to consider. Claudia, her mother's neighbor, called and said the funeral would be in a day. It meant she'd need round-trip tickets and, most likely, expenses for the arrangements if Daniel and Viola hadn't taken care of it already. She wondered if they were already aware of it. However, her pride prevented her from reaching out to her brother or sister. Laura decided not to attend the funeral to avoid spending money and encountering relatives with their mocking and reproaches. After all, she was busy with her studies. She had no reason to go. She thought she could come later and spend some time near the grave. Laura didn't feel regret or sadness. Instead, she felt annoyance mixed with a hint of sadness over the disruption of her familiar life. Her relationships with her mother, elder brother, and sister had always been complicated. Her mother tried to mold her into a diligent girl, restricting her from going out and doing things she enjoyed. She made her study, help with household chores, and iron her school uniform in the evenings. But these prohibitions only made the forbidden fruit more tempting. Laura received a spanking from her mother when she smoked her first cigarette and had her phone taken away when her mother saw her kissing a boy by the gate. Her brother had called her wayward since kindergarten, and her sister would roll her eyes and chuckled. At 16, Laura had another argument with her mother over a boyfriend and left home. She moved in with her boyfriend, managed to finish school somehow, and then moved with him 300 miles away to a big city. She worked for a long time, went through a breakup, saved up for her education, and finally, at the age of 23, she enrolled in a university when she realized how necessary it was to receive a diploma and a good education. She didn't maintain any relationship with her relatives, relying on her friends and colleagues. Although rumors about her reached her, she didn't actively seek them out. Why bother? Just to hear them say, "Hey, are you a bad egg?" No, thanks. Now Laura didn't want to sacrifice even a tiny bit of what she had diligently and patiently worked for. She studied and worked, and in this hustle and bustle, it was impossible to find time for a trip. Besides, she didn't want to go, to be honest. They will sort it out without me, Laura decided and pulled her notes closer. Viola, on the other hand, couldn't become the diligent girl her mother wanted. Unlike her straightforward younger sister, she possessed a cunning and devious character. She climbed over others and wasn't afraid to use methods that others considered dirty. Without any special connections or higher education, Viola managed a small tourist company in the capital by the age of 28. She had short hair and a very extravagant appearance. Her arms were covered with tattoos, bold makeup adorned her face, and she was distinctly cosmetically altered. The news of their mother's passing caught Viola when she was in another country, just as she had checked into a hotel with her friend. She was supposed to have a 10 days vacation. As a calculating and practical woman, Viola quickly calculated the cost of an unplanned return flight, a wasted vacation, and everything else. The decision was obvious: she would stay and enjoy her vacation. If Viola had wanted to, she could have attended her mother's funeral. She had a good financial situation, but her principles got in the way. Leadership is not for women, her mother grumbled. Our main goal is to maintain the comfort of home and preserve the hearth. Let the men earn the money, it's destined for them by nature. We have a different purpose. Well, what purpose, Mom? Are we just cogs in an engine? People get to choose who they want to be, argued Viola. It won't lead to anything good if you go against nature, her mother remained firm. You have already deviated from the right path, covered yourself with tattoos, and it's time to think about family. As usual, Viola rolled her eyes and snorted. What a good phrase, so glad to hear it again. Talks about family, husband, and children triggered a nauseating reflex in her ever since adolescence. Her mother's traditionalism infuriated her more than anything else. The indoctrination of humility, submissiveness, and domestic norms ended with Viola doing everything in reverse. She cut up dresses with scissors, dressed in jeans and aggressive rocker outfits. Instead of cooking soups, Viola chose sketches for future tattoos, and instead of reading romantic novels with bouquets and moonlit gatherings, she sought advantageous connections. She knew she wanted to lead, make decisions, and break free from the traditional values her mother stubbornly pushed upon her. Naturally, by the age of 28, her cherished dream came true. A chain of useful connections led her to become the owner of a tourist agency. Viola quickly secured a position there, then got into a romantic relationship with a man and maneuvered things so that he transferred the business to her. A broken life of the ex-wife, a bunch of fired disgruntled female employees, and a heap of gossip were left behind. But the ambitious woman didn't care. Winners aren't judged, as they say. Viola managed to juggle leadership, socializing, and constant traveling. At home, not even a cactus would survive, let alone husbands, children, or dogs. Self-sufficient and selfish, Viola only loved herself unrequitedly and had no desire to invest her emotions in anyone else. Therefore, she quickly got rid of her admirer, smoothly taking over his business and made it legally hers. In this series of events, Viola visited her mother's home once a year, or even less frequently. The parental house made her sick and bored. There was no one for her to control. Daniel could easily handle a group of college teens when his visits coincided with Viola's, and Laura had escaped with her boyfriend. The only thing left were arguments with her mother, but there was nothing new in those discussions year after year. Moreover, Olivia Sancho had started drinking and complaining about her health. Viola wanted to leave her mother's home as quickly as possible to avoid crossing paths and listening to the old woman's complaints. Let the brother sort it out himself. He's a man and the eldest, the eccentric head of the tour agency decided about the news. It was time for her to go a long time ago. Lord forgive me, she thought a little later. But she didn't say it aloud, so her friend wouldn't hear. If Olivia tried to mold her daughters into real women, she attempted to raise her son as a true man. However, once again, things turned out awkwardly. From an early age, Daniel had to solve his problems almost everywhere, stand up for himself, and not cry. While Olivia lavished her daughters with typical feminine instructions, she demanded steadfastness, a strong character, stubbornness, and determination from her son. As a result, it bore fruit. Daniel indeed became a leader in his class, a class monitor, and excelled in his studies. But beneath his achievements hid a callous heart, despotism, self-centeredness, and indifference to other people's problems. He could make cutting jokes about the unattractive girls at school who secretly hoped for his interested glance. He could snap at his sister and even his own mother. Laura spent her entire childhood hiding from her brother in corners whenever he came home in a bad mood. Daniel couldn't understand why others were crying over a bad grade or life's unfairness. After finishing school, Daniel enlisted in the army and decided to become a full-time soldier. To gain status and benefits, he married a timid girl from a small village, had a child, and by the age of 33, he moved with his family to the coast. One could only guess what happened in Daniel's home, as his wife didn't dare to utter a word out of turn. She remained a mere shadow in the presence of her husband. Even a fool could see that he was unfaithful and felt his complete power and impunity. Daniel mostly returned home for some paperwork matters. He knew his mother had taken to drinking, but he limited himself to infrequent obligatory calls and sending money saying, "Here, go see a doctor." He regarded Viola as a strong woman and almost a fallen one, and Laura as a simpleton and a failure. Whenever the opportunity arose, he put himself forward as an example, refusing to listen to any arguments. As a result, when they had all nearly scattered, their communication reduced first to hello when they were within the walls of the house, then to short holiday text messages, and later, it simply was over. And everyone was content with that. The neighbor called Daniel when he was having breakfast. He listened to the news with a stoic expression, contemplating how to proceed. The death of a relative was a valid reason to take leave from work, of course, but firstly, it was a long flight by plane. And secondly, he hadn't felt any connection with his sisters or his mother for a long time. It was just a matter of blood relation. He had already been away from his homeland for 2 years and hadn't been concerned, but now there were the funeral arrangements. Something resembling sadness pricked Daniel's heart, but it quickly dissipated. "Will you go there?" his wife asked timidly, handing him coffee. "Nah, I'll send money for everything. They can handle the arrangements themselves," the man replied curtly. "But what about the inheritance?" his wife inquired again. Daniel suddenly pondered. "You're right. But we don't know if Mom left a will. And if she didn't, then we'll inherit the house by law as 3 siblings. There's no need to rush. Nowadays, such matters can be resolved remotely." Claudia Iglesias was standing next to the fresh grave with a young girl. Apart from them, there were around 10 more people at the funeral, neighbors, friends, and former colleagues of the deceased. Daniel, Laura, and Viola didn't come. Aunt Claudia wiped her eyes with a handkerchief and adjusted the black mourning band on her head. "Oh, true Christians don't behave like this. I mean, children should say their last goodbyes to their mother. We can't force them," the girl, T, sighed, holding carnations in her hands. "You're right, T. Olivia raised them, poured her soul into them, and yet her children turned out to be so ungrateful," Claudia lamented. "Perhaps, at least, they'll come to visit the grave." During the modest memorial service, people said a lot of kind words and cried over the deceased, but not a single person asked Claudia and T why none of the children of the deceased were present. And they didn't know how to answer. After all, they personally called each one of them. Well, T knew, but she held Olivia in such high regard during her lifetime and respected her memory after her death too much to explain the reasons to every inquirer. "And why are you crying? Tell me, for goodness sake." Olivia looked sternly at her son's flushed face. The boy wiped his eyes with his fist and pointed to the sandbox, where another young rascal, Nemesio, was playing with his new blue toy truck. "He hit you, and you immediately start crying? You should act like a man." Olivia scolded her son. "Otherwise, it will always be like this, and you'll always be known as a crybaby." Daniel fell silent, sniffled, and glanced at the offender. "Don't strike first, but if you get hit, fight back," his mother advised. "And don't give up your belongings unless they ask for it, and say please." Daniel sat on a bench, furrowing his brow. The 6-year-old boy was processing what his mother just said. Olivia was observing the child, but didn't rush to return her son's toy. A few minutes later, Daniel stood up and approached the sandbox. "Please give me my toy back," he asked the offender politely. Instead of answering, the bully threw sand at Daniel. In that instant, the boy lunged at Nemesio and gave him a solid whack on the back of his head with a plastic shovel. Soon, another siren wailed from the sandbox, but it came from a different source. A bruised Daniel proudly carried his blue truck back home. That day, he learned something important: that brute force worked better than the word please. At that time, Daniel's father still lived with them and also contributed to raising their first child. He forbade imposing feminine duties and household chores on his son. He said that a man should learn, earn, and fight, while his wife would be responsible for washing pots and ironing clothes. As a result, the boy didn't know how to make a bed or fry an egg at the age of 9. But he quickly grasped his superiority over girls and carried that mindset into adulthood. Daniel's father got into an accident and died when Daniel was 13, Viola was 8, and little Laura had just turned 2. Olivia wasn't so much saddened as she felt relieved. Max had been a quiet tyrant, demanding complete obedience from the entire family. Olivia, on the other hand, wanted her son to respect women and have a strong character. However, the negative influence of his father had already taken root in the boy's subconscious mind. The sound of shattered plates in the sink pulled Olivia out of a half-dreamed state after her night shift as a chef. She heard noise and arguing coming from the kitchen. "Clean up after yourself," Viola shouted, pointing to a dirty plate on the table. "That's your job." Daniel shrugged indifferently and casually dropped the dishes on the floor. "Stop it," Olivia shouted at both of them. Viola, is it too much for you to clean up and help your brother? Mama, I'm not a servant to clean up after everyone. The 10-year-old troublemaker pouted, clenching her fists at her sides. He has exams coming up, he's studying and getting tired. Can't you be more understanding? Olivia pleaded. And I have a test tomorrow. Let Laura clean up after us, Viola declared. Olivia recoiled and shook her head. She silently picked up the plate from the floor, cleared the table, and washed everything. Then she turned around. Daniel had a victorious expression on his face as he left the kitchen, while Viola was breathing heavily, her nostrils flaring widely. Daughter, you should be wiser, gentler, more flexible. Olivia placed a hand on Viola's shoulder. I don't want to. Viola objected. I don't want to be like you. She stomped her feet and ran off to her room. Striving to support her children after her husband's death, Olivia worked very hard. She took extra shifts, didn't go on vacations for years, and still had her own housework and garden to tend to. There was no personal life, hobbies, or interests for Olivia. She lived for her children and her desire to give them the best: education, summer camps, clothing, treats, and toys. She bought something for herself only when her previous item was worn out or torn. One day, Olivia was getting ready to attend a parent-teacher meeting for her son in high school. Daniel looked her over: worn-out shoes, a skirt with an old oil stain, a blouse with lint, and a jacket from the late 90s. The boy frowned. Don't go, I'll tell them you were working. He stopped the woman who was already about to leave. Why, son? Olivia looked at her offspring in bewilderment. They'll think we're struggling with money, Daniel replied shortly. Don't embarrass me, Mom. Olivia was shocked. She had barely managed to get time off work to hear about her son's progress from the teachers. She turned to the narrow mirror by the exit and looked at her own reflection. There was a tired, unkempt lady with bags under her eyes. You'd better have a rest. Daniel took his mother's elbow. I'm not a bad student, they won't scold me, for sure. Well, you already know that. Olivia returned to her room, and tears welled up in her eyes. Soon exhaustion overpowered the weary woman, and she fell asleep. When Daniel joined the army, Viola was only 14 years old. Olivia hoped that her daughter would become her helper, but everything turned out to be the opposite. Viola's adolescence manifested itself early and quite vividly. It became evident that her father's genes had left their mark here too. The girl would throw tantrums over any issue, slam doors, and twist her face at any attempt of her mother to impose some moral lesson. On the other hand, among her friends, Viola commanded authority and held undeniable power. She could, with the help of others, expel or punish her disfavored companions. You can't do that, daughter, Olivia sighed as she listened to Viola's boastful stories. You'll make enemies for yourself. I can, the girl replied. It's not something for you to do. It's for me. And will you treat your future husband like that too? He'll run away within a week. The woman shook her head. Who said I'll have one at all? Viola crossed her arms over her chest. Well, how can that be? Olivia exclaimed, waving her hands. What about family? Sooner or later, you'll want warmth, comfort, and to care for children. Yuck, how awful. Viola grimaced. I've seen enough of that in you, thanks, I don't need it. Life has so many more interesting things than being some man's doormat and taking care of a baby. The conversation came to an end. Olivia often asked herself, why did her children grow up not in a way she raised them? Instead of love, understanding, and respect, there were selfishness and self-centeredness bubbled in each of them. Daniel stayed in the army on contract and enrolled in a distance learning program at the university to qualify for an officer's rank in the future. He hardly ever called, and when he did, he brushed her off, claiming he had no time to talk. As graduation approached, Viola became more concerned with her appearance than with her grades and exam preparations. She took up odd jobs at different places, doing tattoos and trendy haircuts. Olivia remained oblivious to the former for a long time and reluctantly accepted the latter, consoling herself with the thought that hair could grow back. However, she noticed the tattoos on her daughter's body when it was too late. A piece of artwork peeped out from under the sleeve of her shirt. "What?" Viola asked sarcastically, seeing her mother's horrified gaze fixated on her hand. "Want to see the whole thing?" The girl removed a part of her shirt, revealing a dragon in colorful hues and bright spots on her arm. "Why? Why did you do this?" Olivia sadly sat down on a stool. "I felt like it," Viola shrugged. "I love it." "It's not right," Olivia muttered. "A lifelong stigma for a girl. People will perceive you as, well, you know who. Decent guys don't want someone all painted up." "Mom," Viola snapped. "We've argued a million times, and once again I'll argue. In your childhood, tattoos were only for convicts and loose women. In your youth, you were supposed to get an education, get married, and definitely have children. In your worldview, girls wear dresses and boys wear pants. I'm so tired of your lectures." She threw a dirty rag, which she was using to clean the table, against the wall and stormed off to her room. That evening, Viola deliberately spread out cut-up skirts and dresses on the carpet in front of her mother. "Now, even if you wanted to, you can't make me wear these." She angrily kicked the pile of rags. "I've seen enough of these traditional female values." Olivia didn't argue anymore. Her daughter exhausted her with her behavior. She downed her drink like a glass of water. Olivia quickly wiped away a tear when she saw the blue dress she had bought for her daughter's graduation amidst the heap of rags. Occasionally, Olivia's neighbor Claudia would visit her, a spirited grandmother who had raised 2 children on her own, tended her garden every season, and kept birds. Viola treated Claudia condescendingly. Claudia could offer her jam without prying or lecturing. Laura often played with Claudia's grandchildren and also had a good relationship with her. "You seem to be losing weight, Olivia. It's time for you to retire from this kitchen," Claudia said, stirring her coffee with a spoon in her mug. "Well, where else would I go?" Olivia waved it off. "But what about your children? Look, there are 2 of them growing up." Claudia nodded toward the photos of the girls on the wall. Olivia fiddled with the mug in her hands, staring into her coffee. "Claudia, I feel like my children don't love me," she sighed. "What am I doing wrong?" "Oh, nonsense." Claudia waved her hands. "All children love their parents, and yours do too. You do so much for them." "You're right," Olivia nodded. Claudia took a candy from the dish and crinkled the wrapper. "You have to accept the child's individuality, encourage their view of the world, guide them only a little, support them," she mumbled. "But how can I accept it when they're ruining their own future?" Olivia pounded the table in frustration, spilling her coffee. "Well, it's their life, and you can't shield them from all mistakes," Claudia reassured, helping to wipe the tablecloth. "The world is changing, and they are too. You teach them acceptance, but are you practicing it yourself?" Olivia suddenly froze. Claudia's words struck a nerve, but admitting it was too difficult. She tried to be a caring mother from the perspective she saw in her childhood and believed to be right. "I have 2 boys," Claudia spoke again, sitting back down. "So, what do you think? They drank and smoked in their youth, attended parties, and brought home bad grades. But now, look, they are both handsome, both have families, and they bring their grandchildren to visit me on weekends. They grew up into real men." The neighbor clapped her hands on the tablecloth cheerfully. "I scolded them, of course, but I also allowed them to make mistakes and face consequences," she continued. "If they were rude to their friends, they got what they deserved. If they tried alcohol, I let them feel bad enough to learn their lesson. That's how I raised them. They only truly understand on their own skin." "I can't handle this," Olivia shook her head. The neighbor took her hand in a reconciling manner and said, "Olivia, even if you can't handle it, what matters is that you love them and want the best for them. They'll grow up, and they'll understand. For now, let them be cheeky, don't take it to heart," rise above their childish antics. They need to assert themselves, show off their feathers like peacocks. Let them do it. Olivia recalled her daughter's tattoo, her son's tantrums, and couldn't fathom how one could remain calm in the face of such behavior from loved ones. Yet, that was exactly what her compassionate neighbor insisted on. It was a paradox, no doubt. Viola left for the capital with some guy when she turned 18, after thoroughly draining her mother's energy. She had no interest in studying but managed to complete some courses in management and leadership. Olivia tried to reason with her daughter numerous times about the importance of getting a proper education, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Viola stuck to her own beliefs and stubbornly continued to dismantle the standardized image of femininity. Laura was also growing up, and at first, Olivia considered her to be a sweet and obedient child. Unlike her brother and sister, Laura wasn't heartless, self-absorbed, selfish, or crafty. She helped around the house, reluctantly but still, cooked and cleaned. However, starting from the age of 14, Laura's head was only filled with parties and boys. She frequently skipped school, went on dates, and flirted with different suitors. Teachers called Olivia to ask about her daughter and begged her to influence her, but it was all in vain. One day, after Laura endured her mother's moralizing for a long time, she finally blurted out, "I'm young, I want to have fun, spend with books and studies." Olivia was taken aback by such a statement. While Daniel and Viola at least had goals and desires, even if they didn't quite fit the golden standard, Laura seemed to be veering off the right path. And that's precisely what happened. One day, Olivia found a pack of cigarettes hidden in Laura's jacket pocket. In a fit of rage, she burst into her room and dragged a sleepy Laura from under the covers. "So, you've taken up smoking?" Olivia yelled at her. "I don't need an ashtray in my house." She grabbed the strap of her purse from the chair and struck her daughter's back with it. Olivia had never hit her children, except for the occasional light slap during their childhood. But this time, she seemed to lose control, as if she channeled all her anger for the three of them into one blow. Afterward, Olivia reproached herself many times for this outburst, and her son's words echoed in her mind, "Laura is good for nothing." Following the incident, Laura didn't speak to her for 4 days, didn't quit smoking, but got better at hiding it, just to spite her. She also stopped doing anything around the house, again, to spite her mother. In her company, Laura had 2 guys. One was a delinquent from their senior school, and the other was a handsome type who drove girls crazy up to 20. Laura fell for him head over heels. Mancho was a poor student, but he secretly drove her around in her father's car at night. He taught her how to pour beer without foam and always boasted about some shady dealings with other guys. Laura was impressed and dreamed of running away with her lover to the end of the world. One evening, her mother caught them kissing under the cherry tree in front of the house when she returned from work. Olivia knew Mancho and his family well. They struggled to make a living, the father had a drinking problem, and the mother was a gossip. Olivia pulled Laura out of the embrace of her cavalier by the elbow. "Mom, why do you always interfere in my business?" Her daughter burst out. "You should focus on your studies, not hugging this street rascal in dark corners." Olivia retorted angrily. "I'll handle it myself. You never lived your own life, let others live theirs. You'll handle it by becoming a promiscuous girl." Olivia felt her voice break into a hoarse tone, and her face was burning with anger and helplessness. How could she accept this? How could she accept her own child deliberately distorting her life? Olivia couldn't understand. Laura wanted to say something but didn't. The argument ended when Olivia couldn't find her daughter's belongings at home the next evening. She called her, texted her, begged her to come back and be sensible. But Laura curtly said she now lived on her own and didn't need a mother who considered her a promiscuous girl. So, the woman remained alone in the big house. Others might say, live and be happy the offspring has flown the nest. But not Olivia. No matter how her children felt about her, coming home to empty rooms was harder. She called Daniel and Viola, but they didn't like talking for long, citing their busy schedules. Their visits were rare and short. Aunt Claudia came not too often but somehow brightened the loneliness of the lonely mother. Olivia even got a cat to avoid feeling completely alone, but it could only listen to her and meow in response. Soon, the long hours of standing at work in her age of 55 began to take a toll on Olivia. During a medical checkup, she was informed about a whole range of health problems, varicose veins, cardiovascular diseases, and joint issues. Not realizing herself, Olivia gradually started drinking a lot to alleviate her loneliness and drown her sad thoughts. Claudia entered Olivia's house and found her sleeping at the kitchen table. She woke her up. Lately, Claudia had been very concerned about her neighbor's condition. Olivia had become reclusive, constantly cried, and even her home had fallen into neglect. Claudia tried to visit more often, but she couldn't stay with Olivia all the time. After all, she was over 70 herself. "Olivia, get up, it's already morning." She nudged the yawning and mumbling hostess. Olivia jumped up, looking around, and then shamefully hid a wine bottle under the table. "You can't live alone like this," said Claudia, as Olivia tidied herself up and started preparing breakfast. "Who needs me?" Olivia waved dismissively. "Men only look at the young ones, and I'm already old." Claudia smiled, although she had something entirely different in mind. "Men are another business," Claudia said, "but I think you need an assistant and some company." "My children left," sighed Olivia, stirring the cocoa. "Ah, here you are, rushing down the well-trodden path again." Claudia scolded her. "I have an idea to help you, so you can have more fun and avoid all this." She kicked the empty bottle under the table. One of Claudia's sons often provided goods and other help to orphanages from sympathetic compatriots. When orphans reached adulthood, they were supposed to receive apartments as part of a government program, but in practice, some had to wait for years, and some never received anything. They needed a place to live. "There's a girl there, Teresa," Claudia began telling Olivia. "She's pretty, but she didn't get her apartment and had a baby at 19. Now she's wandering around, wherever she can. The orphanage is no place to live. And you know how hard it is to earn enough for housing or rent with children. I feel sorry for the girl." "I'm not sure where you're going with this, Claudia." Olivia listened attentively. "Why don't you take her in? She could help with the household, keep you company, and you'll be doing a good deed. You won't work at that cafeteria forever, making a cabbage soup. And I could arrange for Teresa to work as a nanny in the kindergarten through my old connections," Claudia concluded. Olivia frowned. The prospect of bringing a stranger with a child into her home didn't really appeal to her, but on the other hand, Claudia was right. She was already going crazy from loneliness, so it couldn't be worse. "Do you vouch for her?" Olivia asked her neighbor. "If I didn't, we wouldn't even be having this conversation," Claudia nodded. "I've known Teresa for a long time, even wanted to adopt her, but at my age, they didn't approve." "Well then, let her help you and live with you," Olivia said. Claudia looked at her attentively, warmly, and understandingly. "Olivia, I would take her, but you need her more, I can see." Viola irritably examined the dirt on her new shoes. The dirt of her hometown into which she had stepped the moment she got out of the taxi. "Home, sweet home," she muttered through her teeth. Viola didn't plan to stay here for long. The next day, she had a flight to the capital. So she checked into a hotel. She mentally prepared herself for the meeting with her siblings, her older brother and younger sister. For the first time in many years, they were all supposed to gather together in the notary's office to hear the reading of their mother's closed will. The news about it came as a big surprise to Viola. She assumed that the house would be equally divided among the three of them according to the laws of inheritance. But it turned out to be a different story. Viola had a bad feeling about it. The call with the news caught her off guard again while returning from her vacation, and now there was no way to avoid it. Who knew what kind of schemes the eccentric mother scribbled in the will? The mere fact of its existence was quite an unpleasant surprise. There was nothing else to do, she had to get back on the plane. After all, she couldn't just leave all of her mother's belongings to her siblings, the quirky soldier and the wayward girl. Viola even calculated in her mind how to cleverly take away her brother and sister's share of the inheritance. She even called some lawyer acquaintances who were frequent visitors to her travel agency. However, they only shrugged and said that a closed will was like a pig in a poke, and they could suggest some schemes only after its reading. The notary's office was located not far from the center, and from a distance, Viola noticed a familiar figure in military attire near the entrance. She snorted softly and prepared to greet her brother. "Hey!" Looking as usual, she called out, approaching him. "Hey! I can say the same about you," Daniel scrutinized his sister. He didn't like her haircut, the tattoos peeking through the semi-transparent blouse on both arms, the lemon-colored stiletto heels, or the red trousers. Viola noticed his disapproving look, rolled her eyes, but quickly returned to her nonchalant neutral expression. Exchanging short phrases about life, weather, and nature, they waited for the last participant of the meeting. Surprisingly, there was hardly any sadness or grief in their words, just poorly concealed irritation at having to disrupt their usual routine. None of them even thought of going to the cemetery to bid farewell to the deceased. The troublemaker in her repertoire. Daniel chuckled, lighting another cigarette. "We were supposed to meet at 12, and it's already past 1, and she's not here." "She's probably trying to figure out where she woke up this morning," Viola replied. Mocking the younger sisters seemed to be the only thing Viola and Daniel had in common. Soon, a taxi screeched to a halt near the office, and a disheveled Laura hastily got out. Her hair was haphazardly tied in a ponytail, her crumpled t-shirt was half tucked into her jeans. "I guess you were right," Daniel whispered in Viola's ear, disdainfully eyeing their relative. "You're late." Viola bluntly confronted her youngest sister. "I know," Laura retorted immediately. "Not my fault there's been no bus in sight for a long time." Viola rolled her eyes again and brushed her bangs aside. "We'll discuss it later," Daniel sarcastically remarked, already pulling the door. "Right now, we have more important matters to do." The notary, resembling a businesslike canary, seated everyone in chairs. "First and foremost, I offer my condolences on your loss. Losing a mother is a big blow," the notary began. "Can we skip the formalities?" Daniel interrupted. "We're busy people, and we don't have much time." The notary ceremoniously nodded and asked for the testator's death certificate. Daniel pulled the documents out of his briefcase and handed them over. The man quickly scanned the papers, cross-referenced something, made a short note, and finally took out an envelope from the drawer in his desk. He showed his signature and the date on it. "Seems like Mother must have felt it coming and prepared this document half a year before departing to the other world," Viola whispered, not addressing anyone in particular. "What on earth made her write this will?" Daniel irritably responded. "Maybe someone suggested the idea?" Laura suggested, but she immediately caught the disapproving glances from her relatives. Both of them disliked the thought, as the consequences could be grim. The second envelope was also properly executed with the signatures of 2 witnesses and the notary himself. Viola recognized Claudia's handwriting with curls in one of the signatures. The envelope was opened, and finally, the required document was placed on the notary's table. The late woman's will was written on an ordinary yellowed sheet from an old notebook, which didn't match the formal surroundings of the office. As the notary read the text, Viola nervously tapped her fingernails on her phone screen, Laura fiddled with a candy wrapper in her hands, and Daniel cracked his knuckles. Everyone understood the importance of the moment and waited anxiously. "I bequeath all my movable and immovable property to Teresa Torres." The notary raised his eyes to those gathered and made a dramatic pause. Silence hung in the air, and it seemed like one could hear a fly crawling on the spine of one of the folders on the far shelf. "I assume Miss Torres is not present here?" The notary looked at the young people with no less surprise. "What?" Viola was the first to jump up from her chair. "Who the hell is Torres? What is going on here?" She rushed to the table, wanting to personally verify if what she heard was a mistake or a joke. However, her mother's handwriting conveyed exactly the same as what was heard. Not a single one of Olivia's 3 children had been included in the will. The authenticity of the written document was confirmed by the complex signature at the bottom with its abundance of twists. Since school, Viola remembered how she tried to copy it in her diary, and each time, she failed miserably. "We won't let this go." Daniel threatened the notary, who was also trying to claim a bigger piece of the inheritance. "We will contest this and sue this Teresa, whoever she may be." "Sure, go ahead and sue as much as you want," the notary nonchalantly shrugged. "My job is done. And don't forget the copies." Under the perplexed, lost, and somewhat angry gazes of those present, he made 3 copies of the will, certified them, and handed them out one by one. "I'll leave no stone unturned." Viola thundered on the doorstep of the office, not caring about passers-by. "She's getting the house, the garage, and the land where Dad wanted to build his country house." Laura exclaimed with horror, curling her fingers. "Yes, Mom left everything to her." Daniel spat on the flower bed. "I wonder for what?" "Never mind, we'll sue her and take everything down to the last plank in the house." Viola's eyebrows furiously danced, her eyes blazing with rage. "We'll take it, but don't expect us to be overly generous with sharing," Daniel cautioned her. "What do you mean?" Viola gave him a piercing look. "Well, my son is growing up. He needs a place to live too," Daniel emphasized the word son. "And I need to invest in my business." "You can earn money for your offspring yourself." Viola snapped back. "Hey, I don't even have my own apartment, I'm renting it." Laura shouted, listening to the bickering between her brother and sister. Both of them stared at her with such eyes that it was clear they were ready to eliminate the third contender for the inheritance right then and there. Laura timidly hunched her shoulders. The swearing outside the notary office continued, and everyone understood that a quick resolution to the matter was being delayed for an uncertain period, leading to expenses and nerves. "Let me introduce you. This is Teresa, and this is her little son, Juan." Claudia introduced Olivia to the modest-looking girl standing at the threshold. She was holding a 1-year-old baby in her arms and had a small, checkered bag, wearing simple clothes, but with a thick brown braid cascading down her shoulder and huge blue eyes that still held a certain childlike innocence and belief in miracles. Olivia remembered how children long ago used to look at her with similar eyes. "Teresa, come in, make yourself comfortable. Olivia will show you around now." Claudia nudged the hesitant girl into the room. Once the guest left, Claudia asked, "Olivia, what's wrong? Are you so cold?" "She's a good girl." "Have I ever deceived you?" "A good girl, Claudia, indeed." Olivia waved her hand, "but it's just unfamiliar to me, you know. I need to get to know her better." Olivia observed Teresa for a couple of weeks. At first, conversations with the new acquaintance were awkward and somewhat clumsy. As promised, Claudia immediately arranged for Teresa to work at the kindergarten, where she gladly went to take care of her own child and earn some money. Teresa didn't do much in the house. She only asked a few short questions about cleaning and other household matters. Her child was quiet and didn't cause any trouble. The awkwardness faded away thanks to the reigning circumstances. "Olivia, I'm back," Teresa announced loudly as she opened the door. Her host's shoes were in their place, but the host herself couldn't be heard. Teresa cautiously entered the room, placed her son's cradle on the armchair, and discovered Olivia dozing. A couple of empty wine bottles were standing next to the sofa. Teresa rushed to the woman and began to bring her back to her senses. Olivia opened her eyes and looked around awkwardly. For the past 6 months, she promised herself every day that she wouldn't buy any more wine. She wouldn't lock herself in the room and drink until the overwhelming feeling of emptiness was filled. But when she returned from work, her feet automatically led her to the store, and her soul demanded relaxation. Olivia suspected that Claudia insisted on Teresa moving in because she knew about her neighbor's destructive addiction and was worried. Furthermore, everyone understood that Olivia's children had no interest in her. They were busy with their own lives and, at most, would temporarily send their mother to a rehabilitation clinic. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" Teresa looked at the woman with concern in her eyes. "You have problems with blood pressure and heart, and yet you drink." Olivia was taken aback. The girl had shamed her. But it was justified. Unexpectedly, the built-up tension, sorrow, and sadness overflowed, and tears streamed down Olivia's face. She buried her head in Teresa's chest and began sobbing. For a couple of seconds, Teresa was stunned, but then she hugged the woman and gently stroked her back, comforting her as if she were a little child. "I always dreamed of having a big family," the homeowner shared as Teresa poured coffee. "I wanted to be a mother. I played mother-daughter games all my childhood, read fairy tales about princesses." Juan was sitting in his stroller, occasionally glancing between Teresa and Olivia. He gurgled and tapped his little fists against the edge. "My mother wouldn't let me play with boys. She taught me to be gentle, obedient, and soft. She said I should preserve myself for my future husband. And when I looked at her and my father, I thought my life would be the same, a warm family atmosphere, respect, and hot dinners at a big table. Well, our table was small, and our apartment had only 2 rooms," Olivia sniffled like a schoolgirl. Teresa placed the cups on the table and sat down on a stool nearby, keeping an eye on her son, who was starting to doze off. "I always thought that a husband was my support, my rock. The one who's in charge but wise. I lived like that until I met Max. I fell in love head over heels, but I didn't see him for who he really was," Olivia continued. "I got pregnant with Daniel, we got married, and then Max moved us here to this house. I thought I had landed in a fairy tale," the woman chuckled and took a sip from her mug. "But not the fairy tale I had read about. I thought I'd be a princess, but it turned out I was Cinderella. You wouldn't believe how much I crawled around here on my knees while pregnant, scrubbing the floors, washing all the windows and mirrors every day. I cooked 3 meals a day with my belly getting in the way, first course, main course, and a drink." Teresa listened attentively, not interrupting. "My husband worked, earned well, and we had enough, but he demanded absolute cleanliness and orderliness. I gladly toiled like a horse in a home stable because I loved him so much. I treasured the rare moments of tenderness from him after his reproaches about a dirty table or tasteless cutlets, thinking it was my fault. If only I had put more effort, paid more attention. Then our son was born, and I became immersed in motherhood, raising a joy for myself. But it's easier and quicker for bad things to stick, as we all know. And instead of a sweet little boy, I raised a copy of my husband who believed that a woman should only serve. Oh, poor his wife now, poor girl. How guilty I am before her." Olivia sniffled again and quickly pulled a tissue from the box. "You're not to blame," Teresa said cautiously. "You did everything to raise your child to be happy. Bad examples and poor upbringing played a role. I wanted to raise my son to be noble, kind, and fair, just like his grandfather," Olivia explained with a sigh. "It's just a shame that he spent so little time with his grandson and left so early. If only things were different, if only. My love, care, and involvement were taken for granted, whether as a wife or later as a mother. It took me many, many years to realize that. Back then, I couldn't see my mistakes and kept making them while upbringing my daughters." Juan adorably dozed off in his stroller, his little arms spread out. Olivia stood up to cover the baby with a blanket, and Teresa didn't interfere. "When I got pregnant with Viola, my husband demanded that I contribute to the family budget, so I rushed to work wherever I could find a job. We were a family, after all. But morally, he was killing me every single day. Then I found out he was cheating on me. I cried to my mother, seeking support. She said it happened to everyone, and I should endure it. The most important thing was the children. He would go out and then come back. That's how I found out that my own father wasn't as noble as I had believed. My mother was just wise and did everything to show me an ideal picture." Outside, it had already darkened, and the October rain was gently tapping on the windows. For some reason, a rooster crowed loudly at the neighbors 2 houses down. Teresa pulled the curtains and carefully took the sleeping wand to the bedroom, promising to return soon. As the new neighbor tiptoed into the kitchen, Olivia was already brewing coffee for the second time. "And then I made a new foolish mistake," the homeowner continued. "I forgave him, just as my mother said. I mean, I was young and naive, only 26 at the time. My husband realized that he had complete control over me and that he could get away with anything. He nitpicked about every little thing, from a speck of dust to wrinkled laundry to the mess made by the children. And I endured it all, berating myself for being a bad homemaker, a bad mother, and a bad woman. And then came the 3rd pregnancy, and I decided to keep it, hoping for a miracle once again. But there were no miracles. My husband was even stricter when it came to our daughters. He reprimanded them for any disobedience, even when Laura was just a little child. And for some reason, I went along with it. I filled their heads with notions of marriage, correctness, and wifely wisdom. Oh, if only I had realized sooner. If only I had known." Olivia raised her eyes to the ceiling and blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the tears that welled up in her lashes. "And when my husband had his accident with his lover, as I later found out, it was like a noose around my neck had disappeared. I was surprised myself that I didn't feel sad or cry. Although I had to work harder, it was the real joy. But for now, it was just in the fact that no one else would come to my bed after sleeping with another woman. The quiet humiliation was gone, and I started to see clearly, but I still lived in the chiseled mold of motherhood. A woman needs a family, a loving husband, and her own corner. I tried to instill this in my daughters. In the end, they see me as an enemy, and my son, well, he treats me like a second-class person." Teresa leaned closer and gently embraced Olivia, whose shoulders were trembling. "I wanted to raise sweet, affectionate girls, but with my impositions, I raised a selfish brat and a slut. You know, Teresa, what's the saddest part of this story?" Olivia looked up at the young woman. "That I realized my mistakes only when they all left. And now, I'm aging, lonely, and unwanted by any of them." "Olivia, don't get so upset," Teresa's calm strokes on her back reassured her. "Everyone makes mistakes, but there are no mistakes that cannot be rectified. You did what you knew and could do. You loved and cared for them as best as you could. I'm sure if you talk to each one of them, there's still a chance to change things. Oh, my dear. Do you think I haven't tried when realization struck me?" Olivia sighed. "I called, I texted, I invited them over. They brushed me off, saying they were busy. The only thing I achieved was a couple of visits with my grandson and money for medicine and doctors. I decided to go see them myself, but I was stopped. I endured it, tried to understand and justify them, but deep down, I knew I was deceiving myself. The feeling of helplessness in front of those I myself created burned me. And, yes, I broke down, started drinking. It's the only way I can momentarily dull the pain of being unwanted by my own children. You've devoted your whole life and joy to others, your husband, children, and strangers. But were you ever truly happy yourself, even once?" Teresa asked cautiously. "I don't remember." The woman remained silent for a long time before answering. "I rejoiced in my son's grades, my husband's successes, the fact that my children were eating well and were healthy." "That's not it," Teresa said. "Although, as a mother, I understand you. I also rejoice when one eats well and sleeps soundly. But it's different. When did you feel happy for yourself, internally, sincerely?" This time, Olivia remained silent for a while, trying to recall that long-forgotten feeling, and only found it in her childhood when her mother brought her a little kitten from work. Olivia played with it for a long time, nurturing and petting the little creature. "I think I've forgotten what that feels like a long time ago," she replied softly. "Many people forget, but it's essential to keep the ability to find joy at any age," Teresa smiled. "Let's learn how to do it again." "Let's do it." The woman also smiled faintly in response. I'm sure our neighbor knows who this Teresa is, Viola speculated, sitting in a taxi once again complaining about the bad road and the dirt in their hometown. When the outburst of frustration at the notary's office subsided, the trio decided to visit Claudia. She had called with sad news and often visited Viola's mother, whose signature was on the envelope containing the will. Viola, Laura, and Daniel agreed that they should start by asking her about it. Time was limited, as each of them had their own matters in the city. They wanted to resolve the arising complexities quickly, but it wasn't as easy as they hoped. Not only did the atmosphere become tense, but occasional jabs and sarcastic remarks added fuel to the fire. They found the neighbor at home. Viola, not being too polite, knocked on the gate with her fist. Claudia came out. "Hello, hello." She greeted the unexpected guests cheerfully, swaying a little. "And here I was, waiting and wondering when you would show up. Shame on you." "Claudia, let's skip reprimanding." Viola frowned and attempted to pass through the gate. Claudia blocked the girl's path. "You have no conscience. You didn't even come to your mother's funeral. And as soon as they opened the will, you all came running to me." The neighbor continued to scold the siblings standing by the fence. "That's the law." Daniel couldn't hold back and raised his voice. "And why are you shouting like that?" Grandma rebuked him. "You've grown up, wearing those flashy epaulets on your shoulders, but you never became a real man." Daniel was left speechless. They remembered Claudia as a sweet lady who had never uttered a harsh word, always bringing them treats and candies. "Let's forget about what you think of us. Just answer one question, and we'll never see each other again," Viola said in a tone that diffused the conflict. Suddenly, a young woman leaned out of the kitchen window of the house, which faced the gate. "Claudia, what's going on? Is everything all right?" "Yes, Teresa, come on in, I'll be there in a moment," Claudia replied. "Teresa?" Viola's eyebrows shot up. "Wait." But it was already too late. With an agility unseen in an elderly woman, Claudia slammed the gate shut. Laura let out a muffled cry as her fingers got caught, followed by Daniel's curses. The group realized that no one here would communicate with them anymore. The disrespectful attitude towards their mother had played its part. Viola and Daniel took some documents and belongings from the now empty family home, and the three of them dispersed to their respective towns without much talking. "This is for you." Teresa beamed as she offered Olivia a sweet cotton candy on a stick. "For me?" The woman was so taken aback that she looked at the treat, both understanding and not. It was late summer, a Saturday, and both of them had the day off. A small circus had come to the local park. Under the pretext of taking Juan for a walk, Teresa persuaded Olivia to go there. "Come on, let's go." She playfully urged the hesitant Olivia, who was already at the threshold. "It's a crime to stay at home on the last warm days of October." The woman hesitated at first, but eventually agreed. Olivia caught herself realizing that she hadn't just strolled around without a specific purpose for a long time. All her routes were carefully planned for specific tasks: work, home, the store, the hospital. She had somehow forgotten that she could wander aimlessly just for pleasure, chat with someone, and not constantly watch the clock. The park was already adorned with autumn colors. Crimson maples scattered a carpet of patterned leaves on the sidewalk, birches swayed their soft branches, and their golden leaves glinted like a scattering of coins from a night rain. Late dahlias and chrysanthemums bloomed on the flower beds with their fluffy pom-poms, and the sun glistened on their petals like beads of nighttime dew. Only the evergreens stood as undisturbed green patches amidst the orange-red palette of October. Olivia admired the scenery, taking in the warm air imbued with the dampness of autumn. She reminisced about long-forgotten feelings, tranquility, joy, a silent and quiet enthusiasm, as if wiping away the dirt from a glass. "Did you enjoy the performance?" Teresa asked. "Yes. I haven't been to the circus in probably 20 years, Olivia admitted. "I never thought I'd go there without a reason or my own children." "One can enjoy many things without a reason," Teresa supported her, adjusting Juan's hat. "Who said that joy needs one?" Olivia looked at her with either admiration or if she suddenly realized something. "You know, Teresa, you're not at all like I thought you were before," she confessed. Teresa laughed. "Who did you expect? A gloomy young woman with a melancholic personality?" "Well, not exactly," Olivia stumbled awkwardly. The question caught her off guard. Teresa wiped Juan's hands smeared with apple puree, settled him back in the stroller, and said, "I ended up in an orphanage when I was practically an adult. I was 12 years old. I already knew what it's like to go hungry, to hide from my drunken father in the cellar. That's why I learned to cherish joyful moments. And at the orphanage, I realized that if you let yourself be moody and cry all the time, you can go crazy." Now, Olivia was listening to her companion eagerly, marveling at how Teresa's appearance didn't match the strong inner core she possessed. However, it was carefully shielded from prying eyes. "And then I thought, why do we only rejoice on holidays? I mean, why is it the norm? Gifts, surprises. Why are we held captive by this stereotype?" Teresa continued, "I started breaking it as much as I could. First, I made paper cranes for all the children in the orphanage, then I figured out how to sew beautiful outfits from the clothes people donated to us. We even organized a fashion show once." Olivia laughed. She was surprised at how much willpower, strength of spirit, and courage this delicate girl had. "I loved what I was doing. I saw that joyful moments are essential for everyone, from the youngest to the oldest. The children gravitated towards me. And, of course, someone fell in love," Teresa sighed. "It was a spontaneous feeling, a rush inspired by my idea of bringing joy amidst the monotony. But, of course, not everything goes well." She looked meaningfully at Olivia, "and when I turned 18, I found myself with a baby outside the orphanage. They wanted to leave him there, but I didn't allow it. I never waited for an apartment and somehow managed to rent a room in an apartment. At that time, I had the salary of a janitor and child support. That's when I fully realized how important it is to rejoice in simply living and possibly helping others live." "Is that why you decided to work with children?" Olivia suddenly guessed. "Yes," Teresa nodded. "Children still know how to find joy in little things. Adults drown everything in routine, and some stereotypes, and self-imposed limitations. We confine ourselves to a cage where there's nothing but hustle, problems, and fears. Very few people in adulthood can sincerely rejoice and see the beauty around them." She pushed back her braid and pointed with her hand to a woodpecker on the trunk of one of the maples. Olivia also noticed a bird with a red cap, hopping busily on the bark. "You welcomed me into your home, were kind, and now I want to help you find joy in life again," Teresa said. "You're starting to do well." Olivia hugged the girl, hiding her own teary eyes from Teresa's view. A month had passed since that conversation in the kitchen. Olivia couldn't remember the last time she had a drink. Her home became cozy and bright again, in a way that it probably had never been before. Perhaps it was because both women needed that warmth, and they both worked to maintain it. They passed evenings talking over aromatic coffee or having walks, during which Teresa was telling Olivia about everything. Olivia was amazed at how broad-minded the young girl was and how much she herself had missed in life. One day, the group found themselves in the evening park again, and a guy gave each of them a rose. Olivia was so flustered that she didn't know where to put the flower. Finally, she felt the desire to return home in the evenings, cook something delicious, spend time with Juan, and listen to Teresa. It was astonishing how this stranger by blood had become so dear to her. Claudia sometimes visited and observed how Olivia came back to life. The blush returned to her cheeks, and her eyes regained a sense of purpose. And this time, Olivia felt as if she had gained a daughter and a grandchild. There were no discussions about what was right or about getting married. It turned out to be so simple to accept a person with their unique perspectives, with their bugs and experiences. And even though Teresa cooked soup differently, cut bread thick, and washed floors in an old-fashioned way on her knees, Olivia no longer wanted to argue, correct, or teach. It wasn't a dispassionate acceptance, it was the very acceptance that she always imposed on her daughters. She imposed it without fully understanding it herself. One day, during lunchtime, two men in uniforms knocked on Olivia's gate. The homeowner came out, looking surprised. At that moment, Teresa was putting Juan down for his nap. "Hello, we're from the utility service. We're checking the electrical wiring for connections bypassing the meters." The men introduced themselves, and one of them handed Olivia some form that she didn't have time to read carefully. "Everything here is legal," she said, feeling flustered. "If it's legal, then we'll check the wear and tear of the wires. You never know, there might be a leak in your roof, and the danger of a fire due to short-circuiting is no joke." One of the workers raised his finger in emphasis and firmly stepped into the yard. "Well, okay," the woman stepped aside, allowing the worker to pass. The repairmen started inspecting the wires and their locations with a businesslike demeanor. Then, they looked at the pole, scratched their heads, frowned, and eventually stated, "You have one wire here that's not connected to the meter, and the insulation on it is worn out. We need to cut it and check inside the house for any signs of short-circuiting." Well, nothing seemed to short-circuit. "The TV is working, the light bulbs are fine," Olivia shrugged. "You can tell that to the firefighters later if something happens," one of the men said indifferently. Olivia had no choice but to let the workers into the house, and they began their bustling activity, poking around the sockets, tinkering with the lampshades, peering into the circuit breaker, studying how the wires were laid, all without taking off their dirty boots. Olivia sighed, propping her cheek on her palm in the corridor. 10 minutes later, one of the workers approached her with a sorrowful expression and said, "Ma'am, you had a leak in the ceiling next to the circuit breaker, and the sockets aren't grounded. They need repair. Otherwise, a 220-volt shock from a kettle or iron in the rain, and it's all over." He even widened his eyes to emphasize the point. "But how can that be? I've been living here for so many years, and everything was fine." Olivia waved her hands in disbelief. "You've been living here for so many years, but it could happen tomorrow," the man continued to scare her. Suddenly, his colleague retreated from the corridor, and right behind him, holding a phone in one hand and a heavy glass pitcher in the other, Teresa appeared. "We don't need anything to be repaired," she said sternly, shaking the pitcher. "We didn't call for anyone." "What are you talking about, girl? We came to fix the malfunction." The man in the blue overall stammered, backing away. "The malfunction you just made up yourselves? Now, get out of here, or I'm calling the police." Teresa pointed at the police number on the phone screen. The men nervously shrunk their heads and exchanged glances. Olivia was taken aback, but her hand instinctively found the heavy ladle on the table, which she had recently used to serve soup for lunch. "Olivia, these, if I may say so, electricians, came without tools, without documents, and with a piece of paper from the internet. Call police to take them away." After these words, the men rushed out of the house so quickly that they nearly took the doors with them. Olivia could only hear from the yard through the window, "You said she lives alone, idiot." When her pounding heart finally calmed down, her breath became steady again. Olivia was now sitting at the table, waiting for Teresa to pour some sedative into a glass for her. "How did you realize those scammers weren't from the utilities company?" she asked the young woman. "I saw and heard from the window when you let them in, and I immediately noticed they didn't have any tools. Electricians don't just show up like that, and they definitely won't come if they weren't called." Teresa carefully watched the drops on the neck of the bottle. "Then one of them dropped the paper they were trying to shove in your face. That's when everything became clear." She placed the glass in front of Olivia and took out a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. It was a poorly scanned permit for electrical work from 3 years ago. "Oh my," the woman sighed. "What would I do without you?" "Apparently, you'd be left without your savings," Teresa replied directly. "Well, everything turned out okay, but let's change the locks on the gates and doors, just in case." The women became almost like family to each other. Teresa introduced Olivia to her friends from the young collective at the kindergarten. Sometimes, she asked Olivia to look after her son while she had time for a haircut or to buy some small things. Olivia enjoyed spending time with Juan, and she even treated him like a grandson. These happy moments were so different from those few miserable hours she had with her biological grandson. Daniel and his wife constantly criticized her for everything and literally snatched the child away from her hands. It was different with Juan. He happily built colorful pyramids with Olivia, played with blocks and balls, learned to walk with the support of the caring woman. Teresa sometimes came and watched with delight from around the corner how tenderly Olivia treated her son. Everyone understood everything, and each of them needed this connection. One evening, the young woman went into the kitchen to pick up the baby from the homeowner and noticed a slight sadness on Olivia's face. "What's wrong, Olivia?" Teresa asked with concern. "Oh, Teresa, my heart is aching for my own children," Olivia sighed. "I wish we could have communicated with them the same way I do with you, even if it's just over the phone. But they haven't called or written for half a year. Laura completely ignores me." Teresa paused to think and then said, "I think you can try to mend your relationship with your children, but it will require patience. I've tolerated a self-absorbed husband all my life. I definitely have enough patience," Olivia said seriously, looking at Teresa. The thought of picking up the phone and reaching out to her children evoked fear and a sense of rejection. It felt strange. She both wanted and feared it. The fear brought back memories of their capriciousness and the struggles with their difficult personalities in their youth. But then Olivia made an effort to push those heavy thoughts away and started remembering the autumn stroll in the park and the circus performance. She imagined herself walking with either Viola or Laura. Finally, after mustering enough courage, Olivia dialed her elder daughter's number. "Hello?" Viola's voice answered after several long rings. "Hello, Viola," Olivia exhaled, gathering her strength. "How are you doing?" "Everything's fine." "Why are you calling?" Viola's voice sounded suspicious. "Should I send money for the doctor or something?" "No, honey, I just want to talk to you," Olivia swallowed. "Well, go ahead, I'm listening," agreed the voice on the other end of the line. Something rustled in the background. Anyone would immediately think that the call had been put on speaker. "Viola, we've never really understood each other," Olivia began. "It's probably my fault. I imposed on you what made me unhappy, without even realizing it. Please forgive me. But now I've recognized my mistake, and I want to know how you're doing, what's going on in your life. I wish we could chat like friends and not hold grudges against each other. Are you willing to do that?" There were some clicks, distant mumbling, and rustling sounds, as if Viola was handling some work-related matters on another phone. "What are you saying? Chatting with your friends? Is Claudia there?" Viola's voice came from a distance. Then it became clear that the girl was dealing with some work issues on the other line. "Yeah, just chatting," Olivia's lips trembled. "Goodbye, my dear." She pressed the call cancel button and started crying, covering her face. Teresa rushed to comfort the distressed woman, but Olivia sobbed like a wounded animal. "Oh, I'm such a fool, hoping for a miracle." Olivia scolded herself through the tears. "Who needs me with my morals?" "I do." "Let's try again," Teresa said. Olivia looked dejectedly at her, wiping away tears. "A little later, okay?" Teresa nodded gently. Disappointment and sadness haunted Olivia until evening. She understood that one attempt was not enough, that more would be required. But the first one had already cut deep into her soul. Calling Daniel was even scarier. He was the most callous and composed of all three. Olivia didn't even know what words to choose for such an important conversation with her son. Only Teresa's closeness, support, sincerity, and involvement gave Olivia the strength and determination. Daniel picked up the phone immediately, unlike Viola. His precise, service-honed hello resonated throughout the house, even from the tiny speaker. "Hello, son. Olivia began. I wanted to talk about. Mom, make it quick. Daniel interrupted her irritably. I have a lot of work. What's up? Oh, nothing, nothing. Olivia sadly lowered her eyes. I won't distract you then. Yep, thank you, he responded. We'll try again later. We can't give up. Teresa comfortingly held Olivia's hand. After the second call, Olivia wasn't crying, but there was a detachment in her eyes. Teresa, I feel like it's all in vain. They are adults and have grown so used to ignoring me that it's too late to change them now, Olivia said. And what about your younger daughter, Laura? She's only a bit older than me, Teresa pondered. I don't know her contacts, Olivia said, looking embarrassed. She blocked me everywhere after our argument. All I know is that she lives in the city and is supposedly studying. Well, there must be some channel of communication left, Teresa persisted. Suddenly, Olivia jumped up and hurriedly went to the room, muttering something. She rummaged through her dresser for a while and then pulled out a dusty diary. Among recipes, notes on cotton washing instructions, and phone numbers, Olivia found her daughter's email address. She used this address back in school. Olivia pointed to the corner of the page. How could I not remember it before? That's better than nothing. Teresa approved. We'll think about what to write in the evening. But for now, maybe we should have some ice cream. Ice cream in December? Olivia smiled. Why not? Teresa winked. Who said we can't? It'll instantly lift our spirits. Doctor's orders for such a gloomy day. With those words, Teresa went to the freezer to get a block of ice cream. Olivia watched her, propping her cheek up. She understood that Teresa was doing her best to keep her spirits up. But a mother's heart would still ache. Even though Teresa had become like a real daughter to her, correcting past mistakes alone was beyond her power. It's amazing how sometimes shared adversities bring even sworn enemies together and reconcile them. After Viola, Laura, and Daniel returned to their cities, they created a group chat to discuss issues related to contesting the will. It took a couple of weeks to figure out Teresa's identity and learn her side of the story. With some struggle, the group eventually agreed to split the inheritance equally among the three of them. However, Viola kept pestering the lawyer with questions on how to legally claim more for herself. The poor lawyer regretted ever getting involved with her and mentally cursed all the gods who had come up with the concepts of the court and inheritance. This Teresa is an orphan with a kid, Viola proclaimed in a voice message. Supposedly she took care of our mother in her last year, but there are no documents to confirm it. So, she and her kid are out of luck. It's quite intriguing, Daniel replied. Some random woman with a child lived there all ready-made and now our mother leaves everything to her? What an unprecedented act of generosity. Can I do the same and get an apartment in a year or two? Laura added sarcastically. Viola irritably clicked her pen, frustrated with the situation. Her world of peace, stable income, parties, and leisure was now disturbed by this idiotic will. Now, thanks to their mother's actions, they had to scramble, spend money, and time. Relatives can really stab you in the back, even after death, she muttered to herself. The prospect of dividing the inheritance wasn't pleasing either. Dealing with her brother and sister was annoying. Daniel was using his child as an excuse, and Laura was constantly whining as if she had a mosquito buzzing in her ear. Viola caught herself thinking that she wouldn't mind playing some dirty tricks on her siblings so that they would be preoccupied with immediate problems instead of fighting over their share of the inheritance. Teresa and Juan had gone to the daycare, while Olivia had just returned from her night shift as a cook. For several weeks, Olivia had been tormented by a vague premonition. She had been contemplating, deciding, calculating things in her mind, weighing options, but Teresa didn't mention anything. Olivia took a nap for a few hours, thought it all over again, and then went to her neighbor's house. Claudia, I want to write a will, she blurted out, sitting in front of her. Oh my, Olivia. Are you planning to die? Aunt Claudia waved her hands. I have a premonition, Olivia mumbled. I don't know, I just feel like I need to do this now. Once Claudia stopped exclaiming in shock, Olivia clarified her intentions. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I believe it's the right thing to do. Well, in that case, you'll need to call a notary if you're really determined, Claudia pondered. Yes, without it, the procedure can't be completed, Olivia confirmed. The women called the notary office and scheduled a meeting. The notary informed them that 2 witnesses would be required. Please don't mention Teresa, Olivia asked her neighbor before leaving. Oh, I thought we could make Teresa the second witness, Claudia exclaimed, waving her hands. Olivia shook her head. No, we can't involve her. Claudia pondered for a moment. My son will be here during those days. Can we use him as a witness? Olivia nodded in agreement, bid farewell to her neighbor, and returned home with a slightly relieved heart. The day before, she had spent a long time composing something else, an email for her younger daughter. She filled pages after pages, scribbled, wrote, then scribbled again. Eventually, with Teresa's help, she created an email account and slowly transcribed the text onto the screen. A week had passed since the email was sent, but the inbox remained as sad and empty as before. Teresa said that sooner or later, her daughter would reply. Even just a single word. Olivia tried to believe. In fact, she tried to notice more good things around her. It became a sharp daily necessity on her path to rid herself of immense guilt and resentment towards herself, her children, and life. And at times, Olivia felt like she was succeeding. In the swift flight of a swallow, in the gleam of a puddle under the sun, in the warmth transmitted from hand to hand, holding a cup of fragrant coffee, she collected fragments of her medicine. And beside her was the one who always supported and protected the fragility of her recovering soul. Viola used all her connections and hired the best available lawyer to challenge her mother's will as quickly as possible. It took a few months, but she succeeded. The judge confirmed that as direct first-degree heirs of the deceased, Viola, Daniel, and Laura, the 3 of them had the legal right to inherit all their mother's property. However, the second part of her plan didn't come to fruition, as the inheritance was divided equally among them. It's nothing, Viola rubbed her hands together as she exited the courtroom. Here, we'll handle it our own way. The main thing is, we left the cunning orphan with nothing. The authoritative head of the travel agency was accustomed to doing this when legal methods were exhausted. A couple of conversations, applying pressure to the right sore spots, intimidating, collecting compromising material. What difference did it make how she got what was rightfully hers? Daniel and Laura did not attend the court hearing. The former cited work, the latter cited the cost of traveling. Viola represented the interests of all 3 alone, though the interest was mostly hers. She notified her relatives about the inheritance through the lawyer's prearranged letters. Viola pondered ways to coerce her foolish siblings to sell their mother's property quickly, ensuring she could hide a portion of the proceeds from them. Viola's plans were ambitious. She had long desired to open a second branch of her agency, exchange her 1-bedroom apartment for a 2-bedroom closer to the city center, and why hide it, move to the States. Neither a fair division of money nor the well-being of her relatives concerned Viola, let alone a stranger with an unknown child. Neither Teresa nor Claudia was present at the trial. The elderly woman and the young mother couldn't afford to travel to the capital, though they knew what was happening. Teresa was taken aback when she learned that Olivia had left her all her belongings. She was greatly surprised and had experienced 2 shocks in 1 month. First, Olivia's passing, then her will. Olivia had passed away in her sleep, having suffered a heart attack. Teresa found her on the bed when she returned from work. This happened 2 months after the will was written. Unfortunately, Olivia sensed it correctly. Where's this damn essay? Laura muttered irritably to herself, rummaging through the depths of her laptop. The day before, she was assigned an academic task, and she remembered that in school, she had prepared a big report on a similar topic. The work had received an excellent grade, so Laura decided to find it, print it, and submit it again, rather than waste time gathering and processing the material anew. The news warmed her soul. Viola had successfully contested the will, and now the three of them were rightful owners of the house, land, and garage. Laura was drawn to find a cozy apartment on the outskirts. She was already dreaming about moving there, planning the renovation, and picking out a new sofa. She'd been searching thoroughly all the farthest school folders in the laptop. The system search didn't yield any results either. Laura was getting nervous, envisioning a sleepless night preparing the essay. But memory kindly reminded her that she had sent the work to her teacher's email back in high school. It was now a matter of remembering the password for the long-unused email account. After much effort and manipulation, Laura managed to log in, and she began scrolling through the inbox with curiosity. Mostly, there were advertisements, emails from some gloomy scammers, and archived photos with classmates. But something caught her attention. Unexpectedly, Laura came across an email from an unfamiliar address. It stood out remarkably from everything else accumulated in the email box over the years. Moreover, the email wasn't that old, it was sent less than 8 months ago. Her eyes scanned the lines at first indifferently, but with each word read, interest, concern, embarrassment, realization, and shame grew like a snowball. Hello, my dear daughter. How are you? I don't know whether you will read my letter or not, but I hope you will. I want to ask for your forgiveness from the beginning to the end. For the upbringing you disagreed with. For my desire to mold you into my image and subject you to the same torments. For not paying attention to your inner world and for the chasm that separated us that evening in the courtyard, turning into years of silence and coldness. I hope you will forgive me. I realized my mistakes only many years later, but I don't blame any of you three. You all grew up to be who you are, and I am secretly proud of each of you. But we caused so much harm. Offenses, misunderstandings, sharpness, and rudeness divided us like strangers. How many of your happy moments did I miss and fail to see, for which I now berate myself terribly? I wouldn't have dared to write to you, my daughter, if it weren't for the help I received. I met a girl who opened my eyes and showed me what I deprived myself of all the years of your childhood. Finally, I have the strength to admit it. I realize that I am asking for the impossible, but let's try to become a little closer, like real relatives. Hoping with all my heart for a quick response. Your mother, Olivia. Laura finished reading the letter, her lips were quivering, and her shoulders were shaking. She leaned back on the chair's backrest and burst into tears. Her mother's sincere and pure words burned away years of accumulated resentment from Laura's soul. That night, Laura couldn't sleep. She forgot about the essay, about her studies, about having to attend classes the next day. She sat on the floor of her room against the wall until morning, hugging a small plush toy she had brought from home many years ago. Her mother had given her the toy as a present on the 1st of September. Over the years, the toy had gathered dust under the sofa in a plastic bag, but today, Laura found it, dusted it off, cleaned it, and pampered it as if it was a little kitten. At sunrise, the plush toy was wet from tears, her eyes swollen, and her face flushed. As soon as the clock struck 8, Laura knew it was time, more accurately, it was already time. She feverishly scrolled through the phone book, searching for Claudia's number. Finding it, she called the elderly woman, apologized multiple times, and with difficulty, got Teresa's phone number. Her fingers trembled as Laura exhaled, hastily wiped a tear from her cheek with her palm and dialed the necessary digits. Hello, Teresa. You don't know me, but we need to talk. My name is Laura, I'm Olivia's youngest daughter, and I want to give you my share of the inheritance.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.